Vermont has always been known for local control of town government. On town meeting day, citizens come together to discuss and decide on local issues and policies. This is the most potent example of local control in Vermont towns. 100 years ago, the meeting agenda included the report by the overseer of the poor. Today, the issue of poverty relief has virtually disappeared from any town discussion. The care for the local poor was the duty of each town from 1797 to 1967. The responsibility to care for the poor, falling on the local level, led to a series of reforms characterized by a reluctance to provide uncompensated welfare and a negative perception of the impoverished coming to Vermont towns.
Who should take care of the poor? The poor should take care of themselves. The poor should care for themselves. That is to say, what we hope is that people are self-sufficient.
I think we're all responsible for taking care of the poor.
I think it's a national issue.
I think the government has a certain amount of responsibility.
That in the United States of America, no one will go broke just because they get sick.
The path I lay out is not one paved with ever-increasing government checks and cradle-to-grave assurances that government will always be the solution.
I don't know. I guess it would be the general population as a whole.
This question has been around for hundreds of years, yet there remains no definite answer. Feudalism defined Western Europe for hundreds of years. Social class was rigid and permanent, yet with these birthrights came responsibility for the serfs to serve and nobility to provide. As the Protestant Reformation captivated Europe and eventually the world, individual freedom increased, land for agriculture decreased, and the perception of class mobility was born. Poverty became a fault, not a condition, and therefore aid became less prevalent. The Elizabethan Poor Law of 1601 finally addressed this issue with a system of local aid. Every New England colony and later state would structure their system of welfare in virtually the same way, and modern welfare was born.
In many cases, this outside relief means giving off a weekly sum or a certain amount of provisions to a family temporarily in destitution. The dangers which attend this mode of relief by encouraging the voluntary idle to become parasites upon the public have been elsewhere pointed out.
During the first decades of Vermont statehood, it was not uncommon for the poor to be placed under the authority of a jailkeeper. By 1837, this practice had disappeared as Vermonters began to realize that this system benefited no one. Aiding the poor was often accomplished through town farms. Through this system, the impoverished could stay, and in theory, work at a farm owned and run by the town.
We came here on April 15th, 1949, Dick and I. We had one child, under 2, and I was expecting another one. And everybody said, well, what do you want such a big house for, went with this farm. Well, we soon found out what it was for, because we had 6 girls and 1 son, and each one of them had a separate room, which was wonderful when they were teenagers.
Richard and Helen Moore purchased the 18-room house, farm, and equipment of the Springfield Town Farm in 1949 for $20,000.
It'll be 64 years in April that we moved up here, down to Westminster, and 22 cows, 2 heifers, and a big bull, and a pair of nice horses. All horse-drawn equipment, all of us here when we moved in.
The Springfield Town Farm, like many others throughout the state, operated for over 100 years. The goal was to provide food and shelter for those hard on their luck. Operated usually by a couple or family, the goal of town farms were to be self-sufficient. For many years, this system impressed many Vermonters, as it corresponded with the value of work, while costing very little. The inmates, as they were referred to, varied from families, the elderly, the out-of-work, and the feeble-minded. Many passed through town farms, while others became somewhat permanent fixtures. During this period, poverty was dealt with on a very personal level. Town farms were only one possible solution, however. The town of Mount Holly only had a town farm for 5 years.
No, it wasn't a money-making thing. I can see just from what record they got there. They were losing money.
Rather than a town farm, smaller towns like Mount Holly held pauper auctions, where the poor were given to the family willing to take the least amount of money for food, shelter, and care. Boys often became apprentices in the trades, too. The overseer of the poor was charged with finding and distributing all aid. Usually the condition of local paupers depended on the kindness and severity of this elected official. As part of this reluctance to provide only monetary aid, each town report detailed every expense in welfare, including the name of every recipient. A social consequence, therefore, was present in taking aid.
A transient person, roving from place to place and living without visible means of support, who beg, or ride, or attempt to ride on a railroad freight train or engine without the consent of the person in charge thereof, shall be deemed a tramp, and shall be imprisoned for not more than 6 months or fined not more than $100.
Tramp, 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 keep on the tramping. Nothing doing here for you. If I catch you round again, you will wear the ball and chain. Keep on tramping, that's the best thing you can do. He walked up and down the street till the shoes fell off his feet. In the house he spied a lady cook.
These systems of poor relief proved somewhat sufficient for the local community, but it did not take into account one group of people, outsiders. Each town was responsible for taking care of the poor that lived within their town lines. Yet, it could be nearly impossible for the poor to enter a town and receive aid. The noted Vermont historian Abby Murray Hemingway accounted an example of this attitude in her Vermont Historical Gazetteer.
Somewhere between 1825 and 1830, a carpenter and joiner named Downer came from Canada and moved his family into a house about 2 miles easterly from Worcester Corner. Downer, for some reason, went to Canada and left his wife and 4 children in Worcester, and during his absence they were aided by the town. The family visited Jacob Putnam in Middlesex one evening. When they were ready to return home, they procured a team, but were met near the line by Worcester men who were felling trees across the road. After considerable efforts, the family had to return to Middlesex. Soon 22 men, with 9 teams and plenty of axes, bars, and levers, tried to clear the way back into Worcester, but by this time 16 Worcester men had commenced to fell trees into the road, as fully resolved to prevent any further tax to support Downer. At this time, the Middlesex men began to cut a new road through the woods around the fallen tree. Although the family was eventually returned home, the Worcester people arranged a double sled and gave them a free ride up north. When they came to a suitable place, the driver detached the forward sled, leaving the woman and children in the road, where they would be under the necessity of soliciting the charity of Her Majesty's subjects in Canada.
Less vigilante approaches were much more common. Most Vermont towns used a process of warning out to keep the town from aiding newcomers. The poor would be given a notice asking them to leave before they could become residents, and the town would be legally responsible. Vermont law stated that you could only become a legal resident of a town after staying 3 years. Within these 3 years, the poor could technically starve. Even as late as 1959, finding a person's place of residency could be nearly impossible. In this case, several towns refused to pay a woman's medical bill, claiming that she was not a legal resident of each town.
The civilization of the past 100 years has tended more and more to make life insecure.
Local control of welfare slowly came to an end with President Roosevelt's New Deal. The Social Welfare Act of 1967 officially replaced the mandate that towns aid their poor. During this period, no town had found the perfect solution to this problem. The treatment of the poor, as well as the elderly and mentally ill, varied from town to town. In general, however, these reforms are characterized by a reluctance to provide uncompensated welfare and a negative perception of poor newcomers. Today, on back roads all over Vermont, the only remnants of this system are street signs reading Town Farm Road.